Hello and welcome to Tochnyi Weekly, the show that gets behind the headlines to discuss the full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine. We broadcast every week, now on Twitter and YouTube. We are proud to present the broadcast in an enhanced video format, simulcasted on Twitter and YouTube for the first time. Thanks to everyone on Twitter who has supported Tochnyi, and we look forward to anyone interested in learning more about the full-scale invasion of Ukraine joining us on YouTube. We have an excellent broadcast for you today. First, I will present a brief report regarding some of the main developments in Germany and France, translated from original sources. Next, we will have a discussion with Colby Badhwar on his recent article for The Insider on ATACMs and F-16s to Ukraine. Lastly, we'll discuss the recent article written by the Commander of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Valery Zaluzhny, and what this article tells us about the current situation on the battlefield. So without any further delay, I will begin with the report from our team. GermanAidToUkraine, which has a website, deaidua.org/en for English, otherwise it's in German, is an excellent source for information coming out of Germany, and he assembled this report of the events of the week for us. So this is the summary of the current week's events of German government aid to Ukraine for the week of the 30th of October through the 5th of November. I have a little slideshow here, so I think I have to bring it up one moment. Oh goodness, we're in the video format for the first time. Thank you very much, back in people. Okay, so we have the slideshow up. Okay, so starting with Monday, I'll just say next slide. I'm sorry, there's a bit of a control issue for me on this. I'll say next slide if I need the next slide. Thank you. So Monday. The training of Ukrainian soldiers, 61 soldiers total, on the Patriot system in Germany has started on Monday, with 10 language mediators assisting in the training. A couple of weeks ago, Germany pledged a second Patriot battery to Ukraine, so that's multiple launchers, which will be delivered right after the training ends. The training will take about 8 weeks. Next slide, please. Wednesday, 1,000 high-quality ampules were produced by the German defense startup Donaustahl and were handed over to the Ukrainian armed forces free of charge last month. Each of these holders has the capacity for the transport of weapons in ampule form and will help with combat medics at the front line. Next slide, please. The Bundeswehr has published a short video with more details on naval training of Ukrainian soldiers in Germany by the Bundeswehr. About 5 months ago, the Bundeswehr made it public that they wanted to train Ukrainian soldiers in the naval sector, but did not provide any details. What is interesting is that Germany is training Ukrainians in shipborne firefighting and damage prevention, although the Ukrainians do not have a navy of their own, at least at the moment. Next slide, please. The German ambassador to Ukraine handed over several vehicles to the State Customs Service of Ukraine. Since 2022, Germany has donated 103 vehicles to the State Customs Service of Ukraine because they want to help Ukraine build a modern European customs administration. Next slide, please. Kiev's twin city Leipzig has donated 3 very modern firefighting vehicles with funding by the Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development to Ukraine. These new vehicles were produced for Ukraine in Poland. Next slide, please. On Thursday, according to Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Valery Zaluzhny, Germany has already delivered at least one Skynex battery to Ukraine. We call this the Skynex mystery, guys. It has already been reported several times this year that a Skynex battery was secretly delivered to Ukraine for testing purposes, only for these reports to have then been retracted later. Rheinmetall CEO Popberger, for example, confirmed many months ago on a podcast that Skynex was in Ukraine. A few weeks later, he retracted his statement. Also, Denis Shmyhal, Prime Minister of Ukraine, reported this in Telegram in April after a visit to Rheinmetall in Italy, where the Skynex air defense system is manufactured. A further official Ukrainian source claiming that at least one Skynex battery is already in service in Ukraine. He left it open whether the one he is talking about was one of the unofficial test batteries or one of the newly ordered ones, because in December of last year, the German government contracted Rheinmetall to produce 2 Skynex batteries worth 182 million euros for Ukraine. These are to be officially delivered by the end of the year. The German military aid list, and again, that is a website that you can go to, DEAIDUA. Oh man, I just lost the website. There we go. DEAIDUA.org/EN to get it in English. You can find all this stuff is updated in a database, right? So this is directly kind of updated from the website. Delivered equipment, so this is equipment confirmed delivered. 12 FFG APC'd armored personnel carriers, 2 TRML 4D air surveillance radars, there we go. 7 Primoco 1 unmanned aerial vehicles, drones. 2 AMPS self-protection systems for helicopters. 4 HX-81s with semi-trailers. 12 MAN TGS trucks. 5 Sonobot USVs. 10,000 safety glasses. 32 satellite communication terminals from SatCube. 1 PCB printer. 30,000 winter clothing sets. In terms of pledged equipment, 25 Leopard 1A5s. This is already discussed, but this is like the first official confirmation. So we have it now confirmed that it's pledged. 11 more Primoco 1 UAVs. 14 AMPS self-protection systems for helicopters, and 13 additional MAN TGS trucks. On Friday, together with its partners, Germany has stated that they've trained over 8,000 Ukrainian soldiers in Germany. This is announced by Major General Christian Freuding, head of the Planning and Command Staff and head of the Situation Center Ukraine for the German Ministry of Defense. Major General Freuding has also once again confirmed his statement from early September that Germany has already factored in budget planning for Ukraine aid up to the year 2032. He said, "This shows our commitment for me. The fight for freedom has no expiration date." Next slide, please. Sorry, that that was the equipment. And the next slide again. And this is the good Major General Freuding. So if we go to the next slide now, sorry about that. Got a little behind there. So on Saturday, Alex Schiebel, head of development at KNDS, started an interview with Der Spiegel, which is a newspaper publication in Germany, that the German contracted RCH-155 self-propelled howitzer is not to be delivered to Ukraine until the end of 2024. This got confirmed by Nicholas Drummond, who is an advisor to KNDS. According to him, Ukrainian soldiers are starting their training on the most modern self-propelled howitzer in the world in November of 2024, with delivery taking place after the training. Earlier, he reported that the first self-propelled howitzers will already be delivered to Ukraine in the first quarter of 2024. This means that they will be delivered as originally announced and not 1 year earlier. So that is the report of German news relating to aid to Ukraine for the week. Up next is a selective excerpt of an interview with who is the Minister of Armies in France, translated by a member of our team. To take the Caesar gun, this is a direct excerpt from the interview. I assume this is the minister himself talking right now. To take the Caesar gun as an example, at the start of the conflict in Ukraine, we were producing 2 to 4 Caesars a month. Today, we are producing 6 Caesars a month, and we will reach 8 by the beginning of 2024. This ability to produce faster will not only help our export drive to export, I guess, their defense industry stuff, but will also enable us to replace the 18 Caesars sold to Ukraine by 2024. With the first delivery starting this month, more than a year ahead of schedule. In terms of munitions, the efforts of Urenco and Nextair have enabled us to triple our rate of delivery of munitions to Ukraine from 1,000 155mm shells per month at the start of the year to 3,000 at the start of 2024. In Mali, we are witnessing an upsurge in terrorist attacks. Was this to be expected? It's much more than an upsurge. Mali is at risk of partition in the coming months. The Malian armed forces are suffering appalling losses with many civilian casualties. Terrorist groups are taking advantage of the weakness of the Malian junta and the failure of Wagner. The situation in the Sahel, the Sahara area, is extremely worrying, and those who are quick to criticize France's record in Mali are now unfortunately faced with proof of the usefulness of joint action in the fight against terrorism. Are Ukrainian pilots being trained in France? Sorry, this is kind of a new section, just to avoid kind of a jarring transition. So next section. Are Ukrainian pilots currently being trained in France? The proposal was made by the President of the Republic, but at the moment, we quote unquote yellow and blue pilots. The Ukrainian authorities are clearly expecting us to focus on the ground segment and the ground air defense. We have trained more than 6,000 Ukrainians at the start of the year, mainly in infantry combat. So that concludes the general news report from our team, guys. I don't know, any remarks on that, or I guess questions I could attempt to clarify based on the text of the report.
I guess that means we're not going to see any boxers in Ukraine soon, is it?
Sorry, could you repeat?
Well, I guess that means I understand that means we won't see any boxers coming to Ukraine anytime soon. The last item of your report from Germany.
Yeah, right. I suppose not.
Yeah, that's my only comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Erland. So thanks everyone on the team who assembled the report, mainly GermanAidToUkraine, who put in a lot of effort. It's mostly kind of a summary of the tweets they do, so I recommend following them on Twitter and also checking out that website for some very detailed information. So up next, we have a little brief discussion of Colby, who had his first piece published for The Insider recently, which is a magazine, I believe. I don't know, Colby, if you could maybe tell us a little bit about The Insider and maybe like what prompted you to write the article, and then we can maybe discuss the contents a little bit.
Sure. Thanks, Joseph. So my ATACMs thread that I put out in September generated a fair bit of buzz, I guess. And one of the things to come out of that was that The Insider had reached out to me, and The Insider, they're based in Latvia, I believe, and it's I guess primarily actually Russian language, but they have English as well. So this was published both in English and in Russian, and I think it was founded sort of by a Russian journalist who's an opponent of Putin, obviously, and has a lot of great people who write for them. I'm very privileged to share pages, I guess, with Michael Weiss and Christo Grozev, who recently put out a very good piece of investigative journalism on Russia's terrorist bombing in Europe. So if you haven't read that piece, I would strongly encourage you to do so. So that's kind of a little bit about The Insider, I guess. So they had reached out to me, just kind of asking me some stuff about ATACMs, and that led into them asking me if I wanted to write a column for them, sort of along these lines about ATACMs and other F-16s and just sort of different weapon systems as it relates to Ukraine. And so I did, and that just came out this past Thursday, I guess. So that's it was great to have that opportunity, and gotten good feedback on this column as well, and hopefully going to have some more stuff coming out in the future, maybe. So excited for that.
So for those in our audience who might not be familiar with Colby, Colby's someone who keeps track of this stuff in terms of procurement, in terms of weapon systems. He's someone who I would describe maybe as an analyst or a researcher of these things. Formal military background, Colby, I'm not super familiar with your background, but I do know you know an awful lot about the intricacies of these weapon systems. So the article deals with a lot of the technical kind of aspects of it and what sort of capabilities these technologies and weapon systems kind of provide for Ukraine. So I guess we could maybe just jump right into like the technical or more specific details that you've kind of talked about both in your ATACMs thread, which was sort of the genesis of this article. So I guess we can start with ATACMs and we'll move to F-16s, right? ATACMs recently, of course, showed up in Ukraine. We were all a bit skeptical for about 5 seconds until we saw boosters everywhere of these ATACMs. If I remember correctly, there wasn't a super high number. We estimated maybe like 20, but you could correct any of this if I'm wrong about it, Colby. But, we certainly saw a major impact on the battlefield, but maybe not necessarily the game changer that was predicted. I hate that word, but maybe not necessarily the, sea change in Russian disposition or the situation that was predicted by some when, we've been talking about ATACMs coming to Ukraine for a long time, right? So Colby, I guess, like, of course, if any of that was a mischaracterization, please correct it. But if you want to maybe discuss like the impact of ATACMs now that we've seen them arrive on the battlefield.
Sure. So I do use the term game changer in the article, and I point out that it has been a highly contested term about whether ATACMs or really any other weapon system would be or would not be a game changer. And I'm actually coming down on the side based on the results of the first strikes that it is a game changer. But pretty much exactly 3 months before the first ATACMs strikes, Tataragami UA on Twitter, who's a Ukrainian reservist officer and does very good open source research and analysis. He highlighted a certain Russian airbase located just south of Luhansk that Russian helicopters have been operating out of. And then 1 month prior to the strikes is when I had put out my thread. And in my thread, I had pointed out this airbase that he had identified and highlighted it, that, this is a perfect target for Ukraine to use ATACMs with the cluster munition payload against, and how just, one missile could destroy a large number of helicopters all at once. And lo and behold, that's one of the air bases that Ukraine did in fact strike and destroyed or damaged multiple helicopters at that air base, and even more helicopters at the other air base in Berdyansk. So Ukraine having the ability to strike air bases, which the Russians previously thought were safe, and destroy or damage possibly up to 21 helicopters based on some of the satellite imagery analysis that's been put out, I would say that that's definitely pretty significant. I would say that is a game changer, because this is a new capability, a new threat to the Russians that didn't exist before, that now is forcing them to really adapt their behavior, because they can't afford to just leave their helicopters within range of ATACMs now, unless they all more than be destroyed. So that's a significant threat that they have to contend with. But of course, the ultimate question is, can Ukraine continue these strikes? Can Ukraine get more ATACMs? Can they get longer range ATACMs? Because the first strikes all seem to be carried out with the oldest, shortest range M39s or Block 1s, which can only go 165 kilometers. So if Ukraine gets a lot more ATACMs, if they get the Block 1As, which have a full 300 kilometer range with the same cluster munition payload, if they can get M48s and M57s, which have a unitary warhead, they can get a lot of those missiles. And the United States has 1,200 ATACMs of these variants that are not actively in service because they're officially expired past their shelf life. So the U.S. Army is not planning on using them themselves. If Ukraine were to get all 1,200 of those missiles, then we could continue to see quite significant impacts on the battlefield from those missiles. But if Ukraine is, just kind of conducting a few strikes here or there, limited by a small number being provided to them on an ongoing basis, then certainly we're going to not see the as much of an impact as we would if they had a very significant quantity available to them and give them more freedom of operation to strike more targets with more frequency.
And I think that maybe goes into the title of your article, right? It's about time. ATACMs and F-16 delivery shift dynamics on the Ukrainian front.
And I just want to say I didn't write the title. Actually, that's something that well, I knew this already, but a lot of people maybe don't know this. Is that when you write an article, whether that's in a sort of an opinion column or just a news article, the person writing the article more often than not does not decide what the title is. That's determined by the editors. They write the title themselves. So it wasn't my title. I might have come up with something. I probably would have come up with something different, but I didn't even offer a suggested title because I figured they wouldn't. Maybe they would. Sometimes the writer gets some input, but no, I didn't write the title. I had a few people commenting to me about that because they had opinions on it, and I said, sorry, I didn't write it. The writer usually doesn't get to choose what the title is. The editors come up with something that I think is going to be eye-catching, I guess, and kind of drive engagement. So
yeah, that's a good clarification. It makes obvious sense. If you're running a news or like a click-based website, you want to try to make sure that when people search for it, it shows up and stuff like that. But it doesn't come up a lot when at least in my experience, we write academic articles. Like they let us choose the title, but it comes up with books. Like if you want to publish a book, they pick the title. They usually pick the title. They pick the cover. Stuff like that. There's some back and forth, but it's ultimately kind of they need to agree. So yeah, but good to know. But I guess it does point to maybe something that is, to my mind, which is you've more or less been calling for Ukraine to get ATACMs for some time, to the point where there were U.S. officials who were saying, we don't know. We don't have any ATACMs to give and so forth. And you've been saying for a year, yes, we do. They're in this warehouse here. They're expired. We have to pay money to dispose of them. We should just give them to Ukraine. So I think that's something that maybe I would like our audience to understand, at least if you want to explain, like there are a lot of these ATACMs sitting around. There doesn't appear to be any real obstacle to give them to Ukraine beyond, I guess, like political ones. And it would actually save us money to send these to Ukraine instead of having to dispose of them very standard means of ordnance disposal. Is that like accurate, Colby?
Yeah, 100%. These missiles will have to be decommissioned eventually. At some point in time, especially the ones with the cluster munition payloads, because beyond just being officially past their shelf life and therefore withdrawn from service with the Army, the Department of Defense has a policy on cluster munitions which stipulates that no cluster munition will be utilized if it has a dead rate that exceeds 1%. So no more than 1% of all the little submunitions, the cluster bombs in any given weapon system, whether it's ATACMs or DPCIMs from a 155 or whatever else, those can't be used in combat if more than 1% of those cluster munitions fail to detonate when they are initially deployed. And all of these ATACMs certainly will fail that standard. Any of these older cluster munitions from the 90s are going to not meet that standard. It's just not possible. Just the technology that they're built with to achieve a less than 1% dead rate, it has to be a very sophisticated weapon with a lot of fail safes, and just stuff built in the 90s just isn't at that level. So the U.S. is never going to use these cluster munitions. They had plans to restore a lot of these missiles to service and give them new warheads. And they, as I noted in my thread, they cut those plans in half. So none of these missiles, of which there are 1,200, are going to be used by the U.S. They're only a cost for the Army. They don't have a benefit because they won't be used. So there's really no reason not to give them to Ukraine. It is political. And there's more than I even thought initially, because when I wrote the thread, I was saying I don't believe that any of the Block 1s, these oldest missiles, the ones that Ukraine just got, I didn't even believe that those were in any sort of operational condition, because they're more than twice past their official shelf life. So to me, I was thinking there's no way that the propellant in these missiles is still safe to use. They're going to blow up in the launcher, and obviously you don't want that, because ATACMs is a hot launch system. The motor just ignites in the launch canister, and it comes out hot out of the canister, and that's less safe than other systems, because you can have a detonation and then destroy the launcher and kill the crew. So you don't want that. So they're risky to use, but evidently they were still in perfectly serviceable condition. I presume that they inspected them and said, oh, you know what, they're actually still good to use. So they sent some of those, and there's really no reason not to send all the rest of them. It's just it's a political decision at the top, where we've seen plenty of both statements and from the administration and reporting that there are definitely escalation concerns that guides a lot of thinking of the president and the National Security Council. So I would offer that that's the reason why ATACMs didn't get sent until now, and we're still seeing sort of a slow drip of ATACMs and military aid in general, because they have these concerns about potential escalation if Ukraine is given too much support.
Yeah, and I guess I just want to say, for the record, I saw Colby explaining, there were U.S. officials telling Colby, like, these ATACMs don't exist, we don't have enough, and Colby was saying, yes, there are, they're in like this warehouse here, right? And lo and behold, like, I don't know, 2 months ago or so, they suddenly found all of them, right? So, this guy knows what he's talking about, and he's telling you, like, we have lots of these ATACMs, they're just going to be gotten rid of, and there's basically no logical reason not to send them to Ukraine. Ukraine needs weapon systems like ATACMs. They're very effective. I think, as Colby said, it was maybe a mischaracterization for me to say they haven't been a game changer. The issue is they haven't gotten nearly enough, and it's a little bit baffling to me why such a small amount were sent. But beyond that, absolutely, I would say, maybe to conclude, a fantastic weapon system in summary for Ukraine. Erlen, did you have any thoughts on ATACMs, this topic?
Well, thank you, Colby, for the thread again and all the other relevant information that you have provided. I just wanted to ask you if you, when we saw the first couple of weeks after they arrived, there were the first day, of course, the helicopter bases that were attacked, and then later we have gotten some reports of other strikes. If you feel in a way satisfied with the results, and another thing I wanted to add more as a comment is that we definitely see that Russia is trying to run a tighter regime on the information that gets out from these strikes. They really try to shut down and keep quite tight OPSEC when it comes to videos and images that are going out on Telegram. I think last week there was a strike that was reported on a Russian Telegram group, and the group suddenly disappeared from from Telegram, or got closed down. So it's a different thing than the calendar guy that we had last year.
Yeah, I'm definitely not really a Telegram watcher myself. I look on occasion, but I'm definitely not one of the guys that are very closely on a daily basis keeping track of lots of different Telegram channels. But just from my perspective of what's getting disseminated on Twitter, it definitely seems to me as well that Russian operational security, especially as it pertains to battle damage assessments, has gotten significantly tighter over, I wouldn't put a specific time period on it, but we'll just say lately. And that's definitely a change, a noticeable change to me. And I'd be interested in hearing the opinion of some of our colleagues and others who are very astute Telegram watchers and see if they have any commentary on that, because that's definitely my impression as well. And that does make life more difficult for us in determining what the impact is. And I've said to people, like, please, if you see any information as it pertains to ATACMs being used, especially pictures of the missile body debris, I want to see that right away so that we can analyze what's going on here with the ATACMs, which ones is Ukraine receiving, how effective are they? So aside from the first two strikes, we have seen some other instances of them being used or purported to being used. The Ukrainians have released a few other videos of ATACMs being launched since the first strikes. So we know that the strikes are happening, but it's difficult to discern what targets are being damaged or destroyed on the Russian side, because the Russians have been a lot better about not posting information and showing the results of what gets hit. So I know some of the guys that do a lot of work with satellite imagery are doing their best to try and figure out, based on what limited information has been available, to determine the location of some of these strikes and try and figure out what assets have been lost. Obviously, just in the last 24 hours, I guess, there was reports of strikes in Kerch on a ship there. That was probably Storm Shadow or Scalpy G, I would imagine. And just in the last couple hours, it seems like a Russian ammunition depot in southeastern Ukraine, in Donetsk, very close to the Russian border, was just hit. So it'll be interesting to see if that was an ATACM strike, because it's definitely out of range of Gimler, so that limits the potential firing solutions that could have been employed for that attack. So I'm definitely keeping my eyes peeled to try and get some more information about how effective are ATACMs, because we have to see some evidence to make that determination. But just if we look at the first two strikes on their own, I think that it's a huge loss in the terms of helicopters that were damaged or destroyed, and it's going to force the Russians to change their rotary wing operations. And I'll just say anecdotally, and I probably have incomplete data to work from here, but I haven't seen too many videos of Ka-52 operations as of late since those strikes. So I think definitely, a lot of them were destroyed, and that's impacting Russia's operations in that regard.
Yeah, it also answers a question from the chat a little bit. That is basically, there's someone asking if the fact that Russia now knows Ukraine having ATACMs is diminishing the effect of the weapon itself. And to a certain degree, if of course you would like to have the element of surprise, and I think the Russians were surprised the first day of the strikes, but at the same time, that also means Russia will have to compromise, and moving your helicopters farther and farther away is not going to be good for Russia. And I think they're actually might be forced to take the risk and operate from some of these airports anyways. So yes, of course, Ukraine should have, in the ideal conditions, had 150, 200 ATACMs and launched them all at the same time on predetermined targets. That would have had a more effect, of course. But I guess Ukraine just have to make do with the best they got.
Yeah, 100%.
Sorry. So I guess moving on from ATACMs, the next topic of the article is F-16 deliveries. So do you want to maybe just speak briefly, Colby, about what you think F-16 as a weapon system will result in once it's deployed on the battlefield?
Sure. So, here again, it's very much a question of scale. Just receiving a few F-16s is not going to change much of anything. There's no weapon system that can make a huge impact if it's extremely limited in quantity. Say for nuclear warhead, but obviously that's not really on the table. So whether it's ATACMs or F-16s or anything else, it can be the best, most capable weapon system, but if it's not in any sort of meaningful quantity, then we're not going to see a huge impact resulting from that. So we're still many months away from F-16s being in theater. April is probably realistically the soonest that we're going to see them, possibly later, but I think April's probably the most optimistic timeline. I'd be really surprised if they're able to get any of those flying before April. And it'll be a small number to start, but it will build eventually as they get more pilots trained up. And as those numbers grow, the impact of F-16s is going to be very much determined on what kind of weapons we have available or have made available to the Ukrainians to use with those F-16s, because the F-16s on their own, and again, these are older F-16s coming from Europe as well, they don't offer a massive qualitative advantage over the aircraft of the Russian Air Force. The Russians have many more aircraft, and a lot of their newest aircraft are definitely technologically superior to these F-16s. So no matter what the Ukrainians get, they're not going to be able to challenge the Russians in the sky in any meaningful way. But they can still have significant impacts and be quite useful if we give them the right tools. So if they're still relegated to just using the things that we've already given them, then they're not going to be very impactful. But if the United States and all of the donor countries can work together to provide the Ukrainians with some new weapon systems, and the ones that I highlight are ARGM, which is an anti-radiation missile, the successor to the HARM that the Ukrainians already operate, the high-speed anti-radiation missile. So if they get the improved version of that, the ARGM, that's a significant improvement in their capabilities. If they get SLAM-ER, which is an air-launched cruise missile, which, I mean, broadly, I guess you can compare it to Storm Shadow and Scalp-EG. It's not quite as long range, but it's an air-launched cruise missile with good precision. That will be very important for the Ukrainians to have, because Ukraine, as best we can tell, is not going to receive any sort of ongoing supply of Storm Shadows or Scalp-EGs, because there's no active production slated for Ukraine of those missiles. So they were just drawing on whatever was donated to them from France and the United Kingdom. So that's very important, so they can continue to have an ongoing supply of long-range precision strike capability, because SLAM-ER does have an active production line that can be tapped for Ukraine, and then the U.S. Navy has a good number of missiles in inventory that should be available to be given to Ukraine. And finally, if Ukraine can be provided with some targeting pods for these F-16s, then that would make them much more impactful in utilizing those aforementioned weapons on the battlefield. So those are the things that we really need to talk about, because now that F-16s are confirmed or going to Ukraine, we have to really focus on kitting them out as best we can, because they are older and not as capable. So it's really important that they have the right munitions, the right additional equipment integrated onto them to make them more effective. And I also add that the United States is not providing any of its own F-16s, but were they to do that, that would as well be a very meaningful increase in capability, because even the oldest F-16s in the U.S. arsenal, which are Charlie Delta Block 25s, those are a significant improvement over the F-16s which are coming from the European countries, because they have a significantly improved radar. So that radar will make them much more effective in the air-to-air role. And still, we're not talking about them being able to go head-to-head with the Russian Air Force. But if the U.S. was willing to provide some of its own oldest F-16s, and we can get more Ukrainian pilots trained up on those, and depending as well on what quantity of F-16s the United States would be willing to donate, now we're talking about actually building a real Ukrainian fighting force of the F-16s that could actually, perhaps in more local situations, gain, be able to go up against the Russian Air Force, not contest them over the entire front or battle space, but in certain situations, maybe be able to be a little bit more aggressive in their operations and trying to at least deny the Russians the ability to operate their own aircraft and launch standoff munitions at Ukrainian positions, because the Russians are having some significant impact in doing that. Now copying sort of the Ukrainian tactics of lobbing these JDAM ERs at Russian positions. The Russians are doing the same thing by modifying their dumb bombs with precision guidance kits and wings, so that they can loft these dumb bombs over longer distances and hit Ukrainian positions. So getting American F-16s would perhaps enable them to try and prevent the Russians from doing that as much.
So my question, as someone who was already kind of boggled by air warfare before whatever happened unfolded in the Russian war in Ukraine, where we sort of assumed Russian air dominance to begin with, and it hasn't quite unfolded that way. Are F-16 sort of built conceptually differently than the Soviet legacy aircraft that Ukraine has been using up until now? Do they have sort of maybe a suite of capabilities, either technologically or mechanically, that emphasize a set of skills that aren't maybe emphasized in Soviet aircraft?
Well, I'm the wrong person to get into a super detailed technical analysis between F-16s and any given Soviet aircraft or Russian aircraft. But in general, just Western aircraft are just better in general. And F-16s are important because, for a lot of different reasons. One, we can sustain Ukraine's F-16 fleet. It's difficult for us to sustain Ukraine's fleet of these legacy Soviet jets because there's a very finite supply of spare parts and munitions that are compatible with them. And obviously some work has gone into integrating some Western weapon systems onto those jets, the MiGs and the Sukhois. But that's limited effectiveness again, because it's an ad hoc integration, and these are Western weapons that weren't designed to work with the avionics in these Soviet planes. So from a sustainment perspective, getting them onto a jet for which Western countries can provide spares and ongoing supply of ammunition is very important. Two, they are better. Western aircraft are better. Obviously, as I said, if we're giving them old F-16s, they don't have a qualitative advantage over Russia's newest aircraft. But again, if the U.S. steps up and gives some of their F-16s, that's going to, put Ukraine more towards a level of qualitative parity. Still not there, but it improves the balance in Ukraine's favor a little bit more by, again, having a more powerful radar, which is one of the main weak points of the F-16s that the Europeans are giving, because its radar isn't as powerful, not as long range. So that it greatly impacts its ability to do air-to-air missions, because you just can't see the enemy at long enough range to take advantage of the missiles that we're giving to Ukraine. So that's what I would say there. I hope that kind of gets to what you're asking.
Yeah, I think so. Erlen, did you have any thing you wanted to discuss about F-16s?
I think you covered most of the things I was thinking about anyway. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so I would say maybe in conclusion, it's a great article. Go check it out. Go to the Insider. Lots of interesting articles. Crystal Grozev, as Colby mentioned, is a really excellent researcher, and I really highly recommend his work. Yeah, so Colby, I guess anything you wanted to maybe, did we miss anything that you maybe covered in the article that you wanted to mention before we move on?
No, I think that's basically it. I mean, my conclusion is basically that, if Ukraine's going to win this war, I mean, a lot of things need to happen, and this is something we're definitely going to get into in the next segment. But the thing that we can control in the countries supporting Ukraine, whether it's the United States or European countries, Canada, Australia, etc., all we can really control is the support that we give them. We can't fix all of the different problems that the Ukrainians have in their own state, in their own military, but we can control what help we provide them. And right now, the level of assistance is not where it needs to be if we actually want Ukraine to win the war. So that's something that, us who support Ukraine, that's something that we have to work out with our own governments is, if Ukraine's going to win, we need to escalate the level of assistance that we provide them and give Ukraine capabilities that force the Russians to actually respond and put them on the back foot. And that's not something that we're really doing right now. It's just sort of these baby steps, right? Giving a few ATACMs, giving, older F-16s rather than some, more advanced F-16s that would actually change the balance a little bit and put the Russians in a position where they actually have to adapt and respond and kind of give them some headaches.
Yeah, thanks, Colby. And that is, in fact, the perfect segue into our next topic. So the next topic, of course, is the widely discussed and disseminated article written by the commander of the armed forces of Ukraine, Valery Zaluzhny. And he wrote an essay effectively discussing the recent events going on in Ukraine. I guess, the counteroffensive, the situation on the front line, just his general kind of assessments and reasoning. Of course, there's been a big kind of brouhaha about it. There's been lots of discussion back and forth. I would say maybe the president's office I don't think it's unfair to say. I think they've made us appreciate this. They think that it was maybe a bit too revealing to the mindset of the Ukrainian military or something like that. But, broadly speaking, I think obviously this is the commander of the armed forces of Ukraine. And there's a lot of very important and interesting points made by the article. So I think Erland, who of course has a little bit more military experience than little old majored in the humanities me, has assembled maybe a little bit of an analysis and a discussion around it. So I'll turn it over to Erland. Erland, over to you.
Thank you, Joseph. And I just want to say that you are all welcome to join this discussion. Colby, Joseph, and I see that Jay has now also joined us. And I know he has something he wants to talk about to regards to the article, or the essay rather. When this essay came out, I was rather surprised, but I guess General Zaluzhny is a man of surprises. He has been kind of an interesting character to follow during the full-scale invasion since February 2022. He's kind of gained this internet meme lord status as well because of his little Yodas and some statements that he has given. But since the start of the offensive in June, he has been very quiet. There were even rumors that he was dead because he was suddenly nowhere to be seen, nowhere to be heard, which isn't very surprising. He was in a very pressing situation, and I guess he was basically focusing on trying to make the army work as best as possible, or rather the whole military. The essay reflects a sense of particular determination. I would say discussing strategies and tactics to overcome this positional nature of the conflict. And yeah, that's also the title, Modern Positional Warfare and How to Win It. It is a very, very detailed essay in very technical, minute details of how he believes Ukraine can overcome this positional warfare and what the challenges are. Yeah, so I've thrown down some bullet points. I'm not necessarily going to follow them like a slave, but yeah. One of the things that he brings up that is most important is to gain air superiority, and not just air superiority when it comes to jet fighter aircrafts, but also in the drone war. And he also presents some very, very detailed ways he believes that Ukraine can win the drone war as well. But obviously, the importance of what Colby was talking about, mainly the delivery, long needed delivery for Ukraine of modern fighter multi-role aircraft, is probably what he is sees as most important. And I think gaining air superiority is difficult for Ukraine, but I think it is possible if they get enough and, as Colby mentioned, well upgraded, more modern F-16 variants. I think it is possible for Ukraine to, in a combination of F-16s and maybe other fighter aircrafts, if that's what they're going to get later on as well, um, and precision long strike capabilities, that they can gain a limited air superiority. I don't think they can gain it over the whole front lines, but I think in certain areas that is achievable. And I also, like him, I believe that that is absolutely necessary for Ukraine to be able to overcome this positional warfare situation. Breaching mine barriers. He is describing a situation of minefields that are basically 15 to 20 kilometers deep at the worst. I think in this with this he means that there are many layers of minefields in certain areas. I don't think that he's talking about a continuous one, but it basically is. It's a belt which is mined. Of course, there are certain areas of that belt which are not mined, so that the Russians can move in between their defenses as well. But we're talking about one of the most mined areas in the whole world right now. And yep.
For our audience, find like positional warfare, just maybe in my layman's understanding, right? You have sort of three kind of broadly speaking types of warfare. These are not necessarily like hermetically or, one or the other, like, lots of armies, but broadly speaking, you have positional warfare, which is what we're talking about, where you're trying to take territory. You have attritional warfare, which is where you're trying to kill the other army's capacity to fight, their weapons and their troops. And you have maneuver warfare, where you're trying to sort of like get around the enemy and surround them and stuff like that. Would you say that's kind of accurate?
Yeah, thank you very much, Joseph, for bringing that up, because I just kind of straight headed dived into the issues that he brought up. But yeah, Ukraine would like to be in a position to be performing maneuver warfare, like we saw basically a year ago when they liberated large parts of eastern Ukraine in the Kharkiv offensive. And in his essay, he determines basically that it is at the current state not possible, because the Russian defenses are both so strong, and also the elements of basically no one having air superiority, or so neither of the sides have complete air superiority or air dominance. And also these new technologies in the forms of drones basically makes it almost impossible to perform maneuver warfare in the classical sense. So if you want to enable yourself to be able to do maneuver warfare, you need to eliminate at least some of these issues that basically prevents the maneuver warfare. He also mentions that going into attritional warfare for Ukraine would be a losing outcome because Russia is a much larger country with many more people and a larger army when it comes to equipment, etc. So Ukraine absolutely needs to avoid that. Jay, do you have anything you want to add to that? You're also more into this kind of military history as well, and he mentions something about World War One in this essay. And welcome, Jay.
Welcome. Hello, good evening from Germany. I was a bit in a hurry, just came home. Yes, I think the perspective sometimes in Western societies is a bit blended or misunderstood in the beginning or in the early phase of this war, as I would say, because the reference to World War One is not so unusual. First of all, when we talk about I have a historian background, and I cannot make any prediction how long this war will last. No one can basically, but we should be aware it can be like years. And from that perspective, you absolutely have to avoid attritional warfare, as you said, because the demographics of Ukraine could not carry it. This for a short note. And the other part is what we are talking about, that the technological deadlock or the warfare perspective is transforming into, as we said, or as Zaluzhny said in this analysis, into positional warfare. He especially mentioned mine belts with a deepness of 15 to 20 kilometers for an imagination, what we talk about. And thus, I think when we talk about the demographics of Ukraine, it is very important, and this is where Zaluzhny is not talking about actually, to preserve the lives of the soldiers, the available manpower, especially is maybe one of the most important tasks for Ukraine, which interesting was not part of his analysis. And when we look at the demographics tree, or the how you would say, the population pyramid we have, then it is also worrying because there is a special circumstance, compared to other Western countries or countries of Europe, the Ukrainian population pyramid did not look that different in terms to other countries in Europe, but it has received some kind of impact, I would say. First of all, after the annexation of Crimea, of course, these parts of population were not more under control from Ukraine. And in the next process, when we talk about the Donetsk and the Luhansk Oblast, this population is under Russian occupation. And then we have the third part. Russia still has possession of parts of other oblasts and in Ukraine as well. And of course, these people are also under Russian occupation. So you have to remove them from the calculus, which is not perfectly there is no perfect perfect data about demographics in Ukraine. For the last part, you also have to think that a lot of people fled from the country when the Russians started their full-scale invasion back in the last year. So this leads like to the conclusion that Ukraine has to preserve as much a capability, I would say, to be able to recruit new personnel. Maybe one good axis, which is, I'm not sure, I would like to, maybe someone can answer it here, is that also like parts of the female population are serving in the Ukrainian army. I'm not sure about how much percentages is, but at the end of the day, you need soldiers. You need people capable to fight.
Yeah, I don't remember an exact number, but it's in the tens. I want to say in the tens of thousands. Erlen, do you remember anything? There was a little bit of discussion about this when they designed the female uniform.
I think it's about 20,000 that are serving in military units, but I don't remember exactly how many of those are on the front lines. I think that's a lower number, maybe a couple of thousands.
Yeah, I would say there's at least enough where they decided that it was a concern that the military uniform that was standard, which obviously was designed primarily for men, decided it wasn't sufficient, and they designed a female uniform. So that would indicate to me there's enough women in service that, you know, if that's an issue, that it's fairly, you know, common.
Yeah, and also conscription in general. Ukraine probably have to rethink a little bit how conscription is being done, because there are people who, for some reason or another, do not need to go into military service, that they can in some way avoid it, maybe because of studies, maybe because of some medical conditions. And if Ukraine has problems with recruitment and actually filling up their units, I guess they would actually have to rethink what the exceptions when it comes to mandatory conscription are. And I'm sorry about the demographic graph here. It was supposed to be a GIF, and it's not moving. It's just stuck on the first slide, but I think it anyways illustrates the problem. The 2023 slide is even worse. So anything you wanted to add about the demographics before I go back to some of the issues we were talking about earlier, Jay?
Real quick, Colby mentioned we have a couple of questions in the audience. Colby, is there any like relevant one that you wanted to mention that would be good right now?
Oh, I just general stuff that I saw people were asking. It wasn't necessarily on the current topic of
Okay, no worries.
Zaluzhny's interview.
We'll maybe come back to that. Sorry, go ahead,
Yeah.
Ellen.
Okay. So I guess we're about yeah. So the main four main or five main topics he is talking about is basically air superiority, breach, mine barriers, and counter battery. So basically that Ukraine needs to further improve their counter battery fires in order to take out more, even more Russian artillery, because we know that they're taking out a hell of a lot of Russian artillery. If you look at the numbers presented by some of the trackers like Oryx or Andrew, our friend Andrew Perpetua, Ukraine has taken out massive amounts of artillery. But it definitely is a focus point of Zaluzhny that he feels they need to even improve further. Electronic warfare is also a point he makes, that Ukraine needs to enhance capabilities, and also then the last one, which Jay mentioned, preparing reserves, and that can also be not just the issue about demographics and conscription, but also training, which is incredibly important. And many European countries and the US have been very, very helpful, and Canada, when it comes to training units, both in the US, in European countries, and especially in the UK and Germany. There's been large training missions going on since about a year ago. Yeah. Are there any questions, or should we go ahead?
Colby, if you saw like a good question, just go ahead and throw it out.
No, I don't think it's anything directly related to what we're talking about. So maybe if we want to field those at the end and just let Erland continue with the current topic, just to keep the flow.
Sure.
Yeah.
I think there's like maybe one more section, Erland, which is like what we didn't discuss, or like, sorry, what the article kind of didn't discuss, or is there additional stuff?
So one of the things that, before I go to that point, because I see that we're going very long here, is that the stalemate is in Zaluzhny according to Zaluzhny is also caused by this very strange new element of warfare, which is this continuously developing technologies on both sides, and mainly regarding drone warfare, both drones surveilling the enemy's movements and their defenses, but also drones attacking the enemy with either drone drop munitions or first person view drone that you can basically stare straight into a trench or even inside of a bunker. These drones are making are doing incredible amount of damage on both sides, and a combination of all these three really makes it difficult to perform maneuver warfare. And I wanted to show this one video, and I hope the volume is not too. Yeah. So basically, in this video, you can see a very good demonstration of why it is so difficult to perform maneuver warfare. This is an attack in Avdiivka. The video is from last week, I believe, or earlier this week, which is completely annihilated because Ukraine has very good eye star. Basically, they have very good eyes on the battlefield and know when the Russians are moving in. Then they have mined certain areas so that they're forced into choke points. And as you can see, Ukraine has an absolute total overview of the battlefield, which is very uncommon. Yeah, so this video was from the 47th Mechanized Brigade, which has been sent to Avdiivka basically to help defending these massive Russian attacks that has been going on there. And this is, I think, a very good example of how difficult it is to perform maneuver warfare, because the situation for Ukraine is very similar to the one of Russia, and this continuous development of technology has basically further locked the situation in this stalemate, according to Zaluzhny in this article. He also brings up some ways of defeating this, and it goes into very minute detail of one particular system, which is drones that can deploy nets to take out the enemy drones. I think this is just an example he brings up. I don't think it is possible to eliminate or suppress enemy drone presence completely with just one singular system. So, but I think it's interesting that it brings up this particular example with the nets. Yeah. You mentioned the fact that I think there are some things missing from the essay, and these are a little bit more controversial, and I think it's natural that he didn't talk about it. It's some points that I just put down. I think the Western expectations and the training of the brigades. This issue we had already in June, when people were very disappointed when they saw the first images from this Tochnyi axis attack. I think that this has been a problem for the Ukrainian armed forces. The expectations that this breach would succeed were massively miscalculated, in my opinion, and I don't know if there is anyone in particular to blame, but I think the Western expectations have affected the way Ukraine has planned the operation, and also the way the tactics were employed, which no doubt led to very bad losses for Ukraine in the first weeks, and also later on in the counteroffensive. He also didn't go into detail of politics and economy. He did mention the overall issues of geopolitical problems that are happening right now. So in the Middle East and with regards to Iran, but he doesn't really go into depth of that. But I think war is always influenced, and also is a part of politics. So there are some things that I would have liked him to talk about there, but in the end, the whole essay of itself is politics, in my opinion, as well. Yeah. And then, of course, the demographics, which we mentioned. So if you guys, Colby, Joseph, and Jay, also want to talk about something in particular, some impressions you had about the essay when it came out, and also the interview that he gave, I would like to have you guys on board. I think I've been monologuing for way too long now.
No, that's great. Sorry, I kept trying to steer you to questions and other stuff. But so obviously a very comprehensive discussion of the article. So thank you for that, guys. In terms of, I think my question would be, the real issue for me, and I think Colby hit on this a little bit with his topic, was, is it a technological or a tactical problem, or is it a simple material problem? In other words, we can talk all day about fancy new weapon systems and things like that, but we basically need to be giving Ukraine way more artillery ammunition to be able to sustain the level of combat that's going on the front line. Right, this is a huge front line. Russia's just going crazy with artillery. Ukraine is able to shoot they're not able to answer back every Russian shell that way, and so ultimately, it seems to me solving that problem and not thinking maybe in terms of fancy new stuff that we need to give Ukraine, or new tactical systems or evolutions in technology, but solving these basic material problems seems to be the primary concern. Obviously, those go hand in hand, right? I guess you could call ATACMs a new capability. We would like to see it in quantity, but to me, it's sort of a material issue. We need to give them enough mortar shells. We need to give them enough artillery shells. Technology has impacted the battlefield. The lack of air superiority has certainly caused problems, but really, I think that, to me, the primary concern right now is the material shortage, the sheer shortage of shells, and the lack of meeting the targets that were promised. Would you kind of agree or disagree? I'll maybe ask Erlen and then Colby. Erlen?
Yeah, definitely the problem of supply and sustainment of supply of munitions is one of the reasons for the current situation that Ukraine finds itself in. But I think that When it comes to artillery munitions, right now, Ukraine needs a lot of artillery munitions to defend themselves against Russian attacks as well. And when they don't have enough, they have to commit forces way too close to the Russian attacks, and unfortunately take casualties because they don't have enough artillery munitions, and that will lead again to a problem when you want to go on an offensive yourself, because your fighting force has been attrited because you didn't have enough munitions to defend these attacks. And as we could see in the video, Ukraine is basically picking off all the Russian attacks, but they don't have enough artillery munition to take out every single vehicle and troops that are advancing. So they have to use basically infantry troops to take the last step of the defense, and that will cause losses. So that is an issue. In general, I agree that yeah, the big problem is quantity, but there are especially two capabilities that Ukraine really needs from the West that we haven't been supplying, and now we got one of them. So ATACMs, but they need more, and modern combat aircraft to be able to break some of the problems that he also talks about in the essay, which is air superiority. Ukraine cannot achieve that without Western supplied aircraft, so they need new capabilities as well.
Colby, any thoughts in terms of the maybe the primary concern, or the what? Obviously, I think to some extent, because this is an article written by The Economist by such a prominent person, it seems like maybe an effort to recalibrate the discussion a little bit on what's going on. So, I mean, in terms of recalibrating that discussion, where do you think we should be focusing? Should we focus on developing new tactics, new capabilities, or this material problem? I mean, obviously not all to the exclusion of the others, but what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I'm obviously biased towards talking about the material problem because that's the thing that I talk about almost exclusively as it is, and I have very strong opinions about that. But I mean, it's the thing that we can control. As I said earlier, Ukraine has a lot of different problems that it needs to address to be more successful on the battlefield. There are problems in training. There are problems in leadership. There's all sorts of different challenges that they have. But a lot of these problems are things that they kind of have to work through themselves. And yet we can provide some assistance here. And again, the donor countries that are supporting Ukraine, we can provide some assistance. But the thing that we have the most control over, basically total control, is what material support we give to Ukraine. We can give Ukraine suggestions about how they should fight on the battlefield. We can help them train their troops. But ultimately, certain things have to be addressed from within. Ukrainian government have to make decisions about how they're going to structure the armed forces, how they're going to recruit, conscription, no conscription. Those are political questions that only they can determine for themselves. They have to decide which commanders are promoted, demoted, fired, replaced for being ineffective. These are all things that really are not up to us. And again, we can provide opinions, but this is just really my opinion, and people can take it as they want it. I think a lot of the advice that is probably coming from us is maybe not is a little bit divorced from the reality. That's something that I felt from the beginning, that a lot of Western military leadership is very much just stuck thinking within their own frame of reference, and they can't really view the war from the perspective of Ukraine very much being an underdog, not able to fight the kind of war that a NATO military would, because they just have very different material constraints, very different circumstances. So the one thing that we can control is just how much material support we give them, because that's a force multiplier. Even if Ukrainian forces make mistakes, there's a bad decision, more material support can be the difference between life and death. And just to give like a very specific example, being an infantryman and having to walk versus ride in a vehicle, any vehicle, whether it's just a truck or even an armored vehicle, that's a pretty big difference. Like there are civilians that are engaged in crowdfunding donation of civilian trucks and SUVs because the Ukrainian military just doesn't have enough basic motorized transport to move people around, let alone armored transport. There's not enough motorized transport. So, we could be providing them with many more military grade utility vehicles to serve that purpose. And then you look at, a mechanized infantryman who might be riding in an old Soviet BMP. Well, there's a pretty big difference between an old Soviet BMP and a Western infantry fighting vehicle, whether it be a Bradley or a Marder or a CV-90 or a Warrior or whatever else we give them. And that can be the difference between life and death. And we see examples of this all the time and hear directly from soldiers who are saying, yeah, this vehicle saved our life. Like if we were in a BMP, we would have died. But because we were in a Bradley or something else, we survived this being hit by the Russians in this situation. So we can't prevent, the Ukrainians from, making mistakes. There's going to be mistakes, but we can sort of reduce the margin for error, I guess, and make those mistakes less costly by giving them a bigger material advantage. So that's the thing that I think is most useful for us to talk about, because we can control it. We control how many tanks we give them. We control how many infantry fighting vehicles we give them. We control how much artillery ammunition we give them. And yes, there is a finite supply to some degree, especially when we talk about Europe, because Europe did not have the deepest inventories of a lot of different systems and munitions. But the United States still does have very deep reserves of a lot of different things. Obviously, we just spoke at length about the amount of ATACMs that are available. F-16s, which the U.S. Air Force has, old ones that they're not currently willing to part with. The U.S. has thousands of tanks and other armored vehicles just sitting around collecting dust that aren't being used and probably won't ever be used. These are political choices to give those or to not give those. And it could be a big help for Ukrainian soldiers on the front line to have more of that stuff. It'll save a lot of their lives. It'll help them inflict a lot more losses on Russian forces. And ultimately, I don't, Zaluzhny speaking about the need to move away from positional warfare back towards maneuver warfare. That might not even be possible. But if we can give them enough material support to get to the point where they are decisively winning the battle of attrition, then it might not be necessary to have some big breakout and get to a point where they're fighting a maneuver warfare and they can defeat the Russians through superior maneuver. I think that, and maybe I could be wrong, but I feel like that may be a foregone conclusion, because again, at the political level, we decided that it wasn't important to give Ukraine enough support as quickly as possible. We just drew everything out, and we gave the Russians way too much time to dig in and fortify and set up all these minefields. I don't know that it's going to be possible to overcome that, given the amount of time that was afforded to the Russians to prepare those defensive positions. It's going to be really hard to break through. It'd be really hard for a NATO military to break through. Like it's not trivial at all, the level of fortifications that the Russians have been able to establish. So searching for this mystical breakthrough, and then a maneuver warfare campaign that's going to allow the Ukrainians to beat the Russians through maneuver warfare. I that seems very elusive right now. I don't think that trying to win the war by setting that goal is maybe the best strategy. I think just sort of giving them the ability to inflict much heavier losses on the Russians through weight of fire might be more realistic in what they can achieve in the short to medium term, especially since they are having so many challenges. If you listen to the troops at the front line, there are still significant challenges in organization and leadership, and fighting a maneuver campaign is going to be much more taxing on those institutions, which are still not fully there by all accounts.
Yeah, I totally agree with everything Colby said, and imagining a situation where Ukraine breaks out and suddenly have this possibility to out maneuver the enemy. Right now, it just doesn't look feasible, and Zaluzhny agrees very much with that in his essay. I think one of the goals for even publishing this might be for Western leaders to realize exactly these material shortcomings that Ukraine have. It is not just about the material shortcomings, of course, the tactics and also command and control problems with that definitely plays a role in the overall picture. But the main problem is basically based in all the stuff Colby mentioned. If an infantryman has to walk all the way to the front line, the last 2 to 3 kilometers in a very, very difficult situation, he will be less effective when he arrives to the contact area and will perform worse. And that will lead to Russia gaining or basically not losing as much, because the fighting forces of Ukraine is just less effective because they don't have vehicles to bring their soldiers back and forward. And they lose a lot more very good the best soldiers that they had. They lost a lot of them because they were driving in civilian pickup trucks, and that's not going to give you the protection you need even from a normal small arms fire, let alone mortars. A mortar will completely destroy an SUV, and most of the people in it will probably die. And that has definitely been a factor to the attrition rate on the Ukrainian side, which should have been completely avoided. They should have not been driving in pickup trucks, less than 1 kilometer from the front line. It just doesn't make sense in modern warfare. It is absolutely one of the biggest problems Ukraine has is the lack of armored vehicles and vehicles as a whole. I think we can move to questions, but I wanted to take this one little bit controversial, maybe controversial statement that is not from the essay itself. It's from the interview that also was the same day in The Economist, and a little outtake from that interview is here on the screen. It has also undercut General Zaluzhny's assumption that he could stop Russia by bleeding its troops, so basically by attriting them. And then he says, that was my mistake. Russia has lost at least 150,000 dead. In any other country, such casualties would have stopped the war. So that infers that he believed that attriting the Russian personnel could lead to a collapse of the Russian army, or to them withdrawing from maybe certain areas, etc., that would give Ukraine either a victory or a partial advantage that they could exploit. that number of 150,000 is quite a big discrepancy between that and the number that the Ukrainian MOD publishes every day. And I wonder if that might also be one of the reasons why this essay and the interview he gave has gained some controversy in Ukraine right now. I know that there are some people from the political side that are not so happy with the essay and his presence in Western media.
Yeah, I think it's safe to say that we kind of all agree that the discussion does need a little bit of recalibrating. I think to Colby's point about this kind of, Western wish casting about a magic breakthrough with some, superior Western can-do attitude or tech or something is not going to happen. We need to probably be more realistic. And I think that this essay was definitely an effort to try to move, the discourse in the West in that direction. I think he succeeded in doing that. So I would say overall it was a good article, a productive article. But as you said, if we have any audience questions, Erland or Colby, that you saw that are good that you wanted to address, please, I would say at this moment it might be a time. Colby first, go ahead.
There's a bunch of different stuff in the chat. A lot of questions about air defense. Some people asking about Vampire and Slinger. Slinger is supposed to arrive in December, I think, if I'm not mistaken. So not there yet. I could be mistaken about that, but I think it's not coming till December. Vampire is there now. I haven't seen a whole lot about it. They are using it as far as I understand, and there are some other laser guided rocket launchers that are being used as well, but I haven't seen a huge amount about them. I assume they're probably effective against drones. I don't know if they're being used more on the front line or more back protecting, doing point defense for civilian and other critical infrastructure targets or not. But I mean, they're there. There was a question about it. Apache attack helicopters being a force multiplier. Definitely not. The U.S. will not send Apaches. They should not send Apaches. They would not help Ukraine one bit. There's way too much air defense on both sides that precludes the use of helicopters in their attack helicopters in their intended role, as we see with the Russians. Anytime they get a little bit too close to the front line, they get shot down. The Ukrainians are way more cautious with them, just doing these mobile sort of MLRS rocket barrages from standoff ranges. So Apaches would not have really any impact, in my opinion. They're expensive in terms of how much they would draw down authority. They're expensive and complicated to operate, to train all the maintenance crews on them. So that would be a pretty big mistake, in my opinion. And the U.S. just wouldn't give them anyway. So Apache's not going to happen. And I guess the question about Patriots and trying to stop the Russian aviation from their glide bomb attacks. There's no solution to this, really. There wasn't any solution even before the war in the Middle East kicked off. There's certainly no solution now. Ukraine's not going to get any more Patriots than they currently have or will receive temporarily from Germany. The U.S. doesn't have enough Patriots on its own, so they're not going to get more Patriots. I mean, the ideal solution that John Ridge has been positing, which I've always maintained that I agree with him, but it just won't happen, is that Ukraine just needs like another dozen Patriot batteries to protect infrastructure in the West, and then they can put all their S-300Ps forward to provide air defense for the front line, but that just won't happen. Ukraine just basically has to wait for more NASAMS and IRIS-T systems to come into theater, and they have to just make a decision on their own how they want to prioritize protection of assets in the rear versus providing air coverage on the front line to try and keep away Russian aviation. So that's something that they have to determine. We're already, in terms of production, producing as much as we can. of these new systems, NASAMS, IRIS-T. Maybe France and Italy can try and cough up another SAMP-T, which should go to Odessa. But this is a challenge that, in terms of the material support, just realistically can't be solved due to the United States' own constraints. The U.S. can provide a lot more than they're currently doing in a lot of different categories, but air defense isn't really that level high order. Air defense isn't one of them.
Yeah, I also see that question about the essay that I wanted to address, and yes, so the question is, isn't Zaluzhny saying the answer is not attrition, admitting his mistaken assumption, but that is actually maneuver? And yeah, I do agree. That's what he says in his essay, that Ukraine needs to find a way to break out of this positional warfare, so that maneuver again, or at least liberating more territories at the time, not just by slow movement on the front line. That is what he wants Ukraine to achieve. I think attrition can be defined in different ways, but yeah, Ukraine is taking out a lot of Russian capabilities on the front lines, and one of the talking points that has been brought up by many analysts and also people here from Tochnyi is that this is definitely something that will enable Ukraine further in the future if they can take out enough Russian capabilities. So to basically to shape the battlefield before you perform an offensive maneuver, and in that way, attrition always basically will have, to at least some degree, a role in maneuver warfare. You need to shape the battlefield before you just go in on an offensive, especially in this sort of environment that Ukraine finds themselves in right now. But yeah, thank you. Great.
Thank you, Colby, and thank you, Erland. I believe that will wrap things up. So unless anyone has any other questions from the audience they want to cover, I'll go ahead and wrap it up.
Well, so we have this this last element that we wanted to bring up from Jonathan, didn't we?
Yeah, that's right. So we're going to close out with that. So thanks everyone for listening. We do attempt to stream live every week on both Twitter and YouTube now. Please do subscribe on both Twitter and YouTube for updates on all of our content. We do have, oh, by the way, I should mention just to the YouTube people out there, just because you guys probably aren't familiar with us at all, the people on Twitter are familiar with us. We've been doing broadcasts on Twitter for about a year. But on YouTube, we're Tochnyi. The name means accurate in Ukrainian. We're a group of just people who support Ukraine, want Ukraine to succeed in driving out the illegal and barbaric invasion of their country. But we want to get accurate information about what's going on in Ukraine. So we do our best to, work with and engage with like-minded individuals who are serious about getting accurate information out to the public, and we try to convey that information. We have this weekly stream, but we also do other projects. So, Tochnyi's a bunch of people. We all want to support Ukraine in this campaign against the Ukrainian people. And we want to make sure that the information we put out is accurate, and we like to try to get behind the headlines. So we try to cover things that maybe aren't necessarily discussed or are discussed in a way that doesn't necessarily reflect the reality. So that's kind of who we are, and that's what we do. And so we wanted to bring your attention in closing to an additional project we have, which is an interview tomorrow, which we will be having Jonathan discuss. So I'm going to let Jonathan close us out. Jonathan, over to you.
Thank you, Joseph. Yeah, as anyone who has obviously been following the 619 days of this phase of this war. Significant numbers of Ukrainians are currently being held captive in Russia, in Russian captivity. Tomorrow's Tochnyi broadcast is going to focus on the topic of this war crime, as indicted by the ICC, and the survivors of either their captivity in Russia or in the currently occupied territories of Ukraine. So anyone who has had more than a cursory glance at basic news headlines during this phase of the war will know that the Russians claim to have taken upwards of 4.5 million Ukrainians, including hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian children, into their captivity. What we know is that at least 19,546 Ukrainian children are confirmed by the Ukrainian government to currently, right now, be in Russian captivity. These vulnerable children live in conditions as outlined by the Yale Humanitarian Research Center's report this year: accommodation where they are suffering from regimes of abuse and indoctrination. Others have been forcibly adopted into Russian families. Russia, of course, being the country which has the war aim of genociding Ukrainians and eradicating these Ukrainian children's identity. I thought there was a parallel in the crowdfunding efforts that yourself and Colby were discussing earlier, actually, because to make the difference between life and death for Ukrainian soldiers, be it in terms of thermal imaging drones, vehicles, gear that they wear, the difference between life and death for Ukrainian children is also something which the guest that we will have on tomorrow works and strives towards. The work that Mariam and her charity, the work that they do is life-saving. It provides nurture where before there was trauma, food where there was famine, starvation, education where before only denial of knowledge and education itself and forcibly implemented curriculum of indoctrination existed. This work is life-saving, and this work happens in the void left by international organizations such as the International Committee of the Red Cross, which have proved impotent, inadequate, and seemingly indifferent to this indicted series of war crimes, which is on a scale, of course, which we have not seen in Europe in our lifetimes. So tomorrow at 1800 Kiev, that's 1600 London, 1100 hours New York, 0800 LA, 1700 Central Eastern European Standard Time, we are going to hear about this work. This interview will prompt further material on Tochnyi. We are, of course, as Joseph was just saying, a group that is just like anyone else listening. We pursue the best information about this war and the plight of its victims. We bring you the stories behind the headlines, and this is one story behind the headlines which a lot of research is done on by both large established institutions such as Yale's HRL, as well as open source research groups. In the case of Mariam's organization, who are on the ground in Ukraine, they are lifting these young lives out of torment and giving them the opportunity, the possibility for a future. So please do join us tomorrow at 1800 Kiev. Thanks. Over to you, Joseph.
Thank you very much, John. Cue the music. I've just been informed by our audio team we do not have the outro ready, or like it's not. We haven't converted it for the stream. So we are going to end the stream now. Thanks everyone for tuning in. We'll be back next week, same time. And again, want to bring your attention. We'll have the interview tomorrow on Twitter. So thanks everyone for tuning in. We are ending the stream now. Goodbye.
Yeah, I don't have the outro, but I'll send this as a one-time outro.
Люблю свою страну,
Bye everyone. Thanks for listening.
люблю свою собаку. Я всего на свете член, почти что супермен, но редко лезу